health actually starts mentally. And, for a lot of us, speaking as men, we were taught, don't show your feelings, man up, don't cry, be strong and all that. And what that actually does is it creates weaker men and generational weaker men. My humble beginnings was in Fresno, California, everyone from my neighborhood, we were all on government assistance. Back then it was called welfare. And, life was extremely hard, wearing the same clothes. I'm dyslexic, extremely dyslexic. Back then, they didn't really know what dyslexia was. So we were considered the stupid ones, the one with the dummy hats on. And, I was really a good kid. Didn't believe in getting in trouble or anything like that. But from back then, you had to get up and go write on the chalkboard. Teacher said, come and spell something. And, I would always have to get in fights during recess because I would get teased on my inability to transfer my thoughts into writing. And what happened is I just remember the bad kids never had to do that. The teachers didn't deal with them. And at one time I just got called up, Miss Wheeler, come up and write whatever on a chalkboard. And I just said, F you. And what that caused me to do is to go into the principal's office. Well, back then you got paddlings. So they call your parents, you get a paddling. But from that point on, the teacher never called my name anymore. So I got to kind of disappear into that. And that kind of started my journey of what I didn't even know, was aware of, was my mental health problem. Growing older, just getting teased. Back in my time, the neighborhood was rough, man. Either you got preyed upon or you were the prayer. I was the one who just got preyed upon all the time. So I had started martial arts, kind of built my confidence, but I just never believed in fighting. I just couldn't bring myself to hit a person on the street. So what I would do is I would invite the bully to come to my martial arts class, and I would just work him. And then the bully would then go back and say, oh, don't go fight him, it's karate. But, to be really honest, again, what I was going through is this, really mental traumatic parts of my life. I got the fortune of being asked to write a book about my whole life back in 2003. And when it was offered to me, I was like, man, I'm just going to take their money and I'm not going to tell the truth. And my business partner at the time was like, Flex, don't do that. I'm like, why? Nobody knows. He goes, every little part of the corner of the world where you did this or you did that, you're going to lose their respect. So I denied writing a book. And then later on, I started getting really sick, started having health problems. And, I was raised in church. I was raised by my grandmother. And, I give her the accolades. The only reason I'm not dead or in prison is because my love for her. I couldn't go down a certain road and disappoint her. And I end up getting a young lady pregnant when I was 14 years old. And here we were struggling and everything. And, it's just, now I fully understand it was just Satan at work. But how does that thought of taking your life as a kid even comes into your mind? And I remember I was on my moped and I'd heard these rumors about this girl being pregnant. And I, got on my little moped and went to her house and, she opened her door and belly's just as big as ever. And I'm like, who is that? And she's like, yours, and slammed the door in my face. So I was like, man, I done brought shame to my grandmother. Here it is, we barely got nothing. And I done brought this upon her. So just again, now being older, understanding that what was work, but I ended up getting on my moped and it was storming that night. And I ended up going up the off-ramp, that's normally an off-ramp. I went up the off-ramp and I'm sitting there watching these cars go by, just crying, trying to get my emotions up to be able to drive my moped out in front of a car. And again, it's like, how does a 14-year-old come up with these thoughts? So I had the pure awareness that I couldn't pull out in front of a car because it would stop too fast. And either I'll get mangled and I get a butt whooping when I get home. So I was like, no, I got to pull out in front of a diesel because, the brakes are going to lock up and it's still going to slide and it'll be able to hit me. And again, just the mental part of that is I'm sitting up there sobbing and I couldn't bring myself to do it. So all the bad thoughts started coming in. man, you can't even do this. You didn't got this girl pregnant. You can't even kill yourself. You can't even do nothing right. So I remember driving home on my moped, and being that it was raining so much, I come from I call it an American family, or it's a broken home. I don't have a snapshot image of a remembering my dad being in the home. So he ended up moving back into the house with us where my grandmother was living, his mother. And because it was raining, I could just walk in the house and nobody knew I had tears, being that we're so dysfunctional. Nobody asked how I was doing. And I remember, walking into my sister's bedroom, and she had this little 22 caliber gun. And I'm like, kind of being all happy, like, hey, sis, can I see your gun for a second? And she's like, no, boy, get out of here. So that triggered thoughts. I'm like, man, you still can't do nothing right. So I went to my bedroom and I grabbed the bottle of aspirins and I just took all of them. And I remember, laying there thinking like, man, you did it now. There's no coming back from this. I was woken up by my grandmother. I couldn't hear, I could barely see her. And, my grandmother is one of those, true grandmothers. She can see good and bad just coming through the door. I'd bring a friend in the house and she'd be like, get him out of here. He ain't no good. I'd be like, grandma, but she just had that real grandmother. So I remember her looking, at me and staring at the bottle and immediately grabbing me, taking me into the shower, going to the hospital and get my stomach pumped. But again, that was the beginning of my mental hurdles that I was going through. Becoming a martial artist, fighting at a high level, and then getting into bodybuilding. And, again, I just didn't know what I wanted to do in life whatsoever. But back then it was, the Crips and the Bloods were first starting. And it was like just immediately families were torn apart based on what block. And I knew I didn't want to do that. I knew I didn't like my life. I knew I didn't like being hungry. I knew I didn't like the lifestyle that I lived. But I was like, how could I go and rob or hurt somebody else and put them through what I don't like? So I just kept trying. I got into martial arts, then got into bodybuilding because back then, it was track meets. And, back then it was like your 501 jeans and a Britannian. So I had some little shoestrings hanging out of my shirt. It was the only way I was going to be able to catch girls. But it just kind of circled and grew into that. I started competing. And found out that I can make money at it, and I was just all in from there. Ended up turning pro after a few times. I won Mr. California, and then ended up winning a Mr. USA, which allowed me to turn pro. And my first pro competition I ended up competing against the number 3 ranked in the world, and ended up defeating them. So I'm like, wow, that was a gimmick. Again, my mindset now, like, wow. They're going to come to my house and take my trophies and figure out I'm Fugazi. And the next week, I ended up going to another show and up competing against a number 2 rank and number 3 rank and beating them in a perfect score. And just again, I'm thinking, like, they're going to figure out that just I don't belong to be here. It was just all my self-doubts. We really got to be careful in the words that we speak to ourselves. Because, imagine women, a guy just walking by and calling you a B. You're not one. But you're going to respond to that. So imagine just the words that we say to ourselves all the time. So again, hear me. I'm just speaking all this darkness into myself. And while still trying to take my life, I lived very recklessly. I remember that second pro show that I won. The first pro show was $10,000. And the second pro show was $70,000. So I had just made $80,000. That was more than I had made in my entire life. That was more than my parents had made in their entire life. And I wasn't raised on that. I didn't have any uncles or aunts or anything to talk to me about bank accounts or credit cards or anything like that. So, I just remember watching all these movies of, bachelors with white furniture and all that. So I went to the store and bought all white, leather furniture and got me an apartment. And I didn't even know about a bank account. I kept my money in my freezer. I didn't have any appliance to cook. So if anybody came to my house to visit, they looking around and open the freezer. And I'm like, you got one shot. It ain't nothing in there but money. So if I hear the freezer open again, we got a major problem. But I ended up competing 2 more times. My pro debut in 1993 and winning the English Grand Prix and the French Grand Prix. And at the end of the year, God grace, I ended up placing second in the Mr. Olympia, which is like our Olympics. So at that point, I'd set precedence in having the best pro debut in the history of the entire sport, which still goes on to now. But again, I just continued living recklessly. I mean, I would buy nice, expensive cars and jewelry because I was like, if people look at this and they respect this Mercedes, maybe they're going to respect the person who's in this Mercedes, because I had no self-esteem for myself. And I just always remembered, even competing in shows that I knew that I was going to be competing against someone that I defeated already, I would just speak these negative thoughts into myself. And as I was talking to a young man who is kind of a historian on my life, he knows more about my career than I do, because I done forgot more. I done forgot more about me competing than I remember. But it was 1998, and at that time, the current Mr. Olympia had retired, so it was all in the magazines that I was going to be number one and all that stuff. And I just couldn't handle the pressure. If it was any other show, I'd be like, this is my show. You got to come in and take this. But I just always never believed that I could be number one. I would always sabotage myself. I would wear like the nicest Michael Jordan gear, to the train, to go and train and then go out and go clubbing after that. I would just sabotage myself. And I remember laying on the floor and, these gentlemen that was in the same room, they didn't even have the ability to be in a top 10. And I remember laying there and them talking about how they were going to win and how hard they trained and this, that, and other. And I'm like, it just dawned on me. It's like, what's wrong with me? Why can't I believe that I deserve to be number one? And all that spawns from your childhood. It took me up until 2 years ago to realize how deeply my childhood had affected me. And, we're really not aware of that, but all the things that I was doing, living recklessly and all that was based on my childhood of just not having no belief in myself. Unfortunately, my mother was born in the 40s and, she was very dyslexic also, and she already had, 5 kids at the age of 21. So here she is trying to help me in school. And I vividly remember I was like maybe, 8 or 9 years old, and she's trying to help me spell this word. And every time I got it wrong, she would hit me, and I remember her saying, just like, damn, you're going to be stupid just like me. And I didn't get it then, but now I get it. I've had those conversations with my mother about, why did you do this? I had those conversations with my dad, like, why did you leave? Why did you do that? And now I understand, I had to have that conversation because now as a parent of 5, I've made mistakes where I thought I was going to be the perfect parent. I've made mistakes. So I was like, man, I got to go back and forgive my parents in hopes that my kids give me a second chance and stuff. So continuing, I just started having health problems. In 1998, I kept gaining like over 20 to 30 pounds after each competition, which is very deadly, and we couldn't figure out why. So I started going to all these different doctors, and unfortunately, wow, when you really need a doctor, you find out how little they really know. It's just deafening. But they're making all these guesses. Oh, it's because you eat too much protein. Oh, it's because you use these certain sports technology drugs. And I was like, man, you guys are it ain't because of that. So, again, those dark thoughts start creeping back in my head just because the pain and everything that I was going through. I was like, let me just take this gun and just end it. And a lot of times when you're really deeply suicidal, you'll look at a person and look at everything they have and like, wow, but you got this, but you got that. What about your kids? What about that? But the truth is when you're really severely suicidal, all those things only push you to hurry up and do it. So I would have these vivid thoughts of my kids standing over my casket and them having to live the rest of their life of knowing that their famous dad took their life. But those things only triggered me to hurry up. And I'm like, hurry up and pull this trigger, man. You don't got to feel that no more. So it eggs you on. It doesn't keep you from doing that when you're in that type of mind frame. But we kept getting these work done and these lab works done, and they couldn't figure out what it was. And, finally, we went to a doctor and they said, let us do a lymph node biopsy. And I was like, man, it was a kidney biopsy. And I was like, wow, that sounds really intrusive. I don't want to do that. And he's like, well, let us do a lymph node biopsy. And I'm like, okay, let's do that. And then from that, I almost died because I ended up getting septic from that little, procedure that they did. But it took them a year to figure out what was wrong, because at that time it was only one other athlete that had this kidney disease. But they called me in 2002 and it was like, listen, you need to rethink your life. I'm like, I'm sitting there, I'm like 280 pounds and I'm just, like I never went over like 4% body fat. So I'm feeling like Superman. I'm looking like Superman. And they like explained to me, listen, you have a disease called focal glomerulosclerosis, FSGS. And I was like, what is that? And they goes, well, it's the most aggressive and deadliest kidney disease known to men. And, obviously being the athlete that I was, I had to use certain things to look that way, because when I grew up, I was known as Skinny Kenny, so if you kind of, Google me and see what I look like as a teenager and then what I end up looking like as a pro athlete, just the metamorphosis that I went through and the things that I had to take, you'd be like, wow, that's unnormal, that's unhuman. But what it really did is it played even a bigger role on my thinking and all that. So immediately I thought like, okay, I did this, right, because of the things I took. And they're like, no, we know you didn't. I'm like, well, how do you know that? It's like, well, there's kids that had the same disease, and there's another pro athlete, a basketball player who has the disease, but he hasn't released his name. Later on, I ended up finding out that was Alonzo Mourning. They had explained to me immediately right then, listen, you're not going to make it out of your 30s without having kidney failure. You won't make it out of your 40s without passing away if you don't have a kidney transplant. But I don't feel it. I don't get it. So I competed one more year and again, just had health problems immediately after this show. And I'm like, okay, I retire, I give up. And, at that time I had a close friend who was my training partner. I give him all the credit. His name is Rico McClinton. We met back when we were 19 years old in Fresno. We did the Teenage Black America, and I'm from Fresno and he was from like Compton. And it was just me and him, competing. He was taller and bigger than me. I ended up winning. And I remember him standing next to me and I was like, man, I could just feel it like, and this dude want to whoop my ass on stage, And I was just terrified of him. Fast forward, after I won to California, I went down to Venice, Gold's Gym, and I walked into the great Gold's Gym. And we hadn't seen each other from the age of 20 to since we were 19 years old. And I remember looking in the gym and from a distance, I'm like, Rico, and he's like, Flex. And we just hit it off like that. Long story short, Rico never knew God, never. Came from Compton, came from Bloods and Crips and all that. I grew up knowing God and I walked away from that. And Rico, when he discovered God, it was like just like that, just a turn on a dime. Didn't want to hang out anymore, didn't want to talk that talk, didn't want to travel, all the things they were doing. And it cut me because I'm like, man, what's going on? How come you don't want to hang out? And he's like, nothing, Flex, nothing, So he knew that I was so off the chain that he was like, even God can't help Flex, So he didn't even want to share his faith with me. And finally, I just kept drilling on these. Finally, he's like, Flex, no, I gave my life to Christ, man. I don't do that no more. And I was like, well, what church you go to? And he didn't want to share that with me. And finally, he shared it with me. And long story short, while I was still competing, I was in that church and I started having to get dialyzed because of my kidney disease and everything. So I would come to church with tubes out of this neck and they'd take it. I'd get a staph infection. It'd be in my other neck and this pec and this pec. And so they would see that. I couldn't hide it in church. And finally they said, Flex, please, will you stand and, explain to the congregation what's going on. And as I was explaining, and that I would need a kidney transplant, it was like 7 people stood up immediately and put their hands up that they would try. And it was a young lady who was able to go through all the process and be able to be my donor. And I remember when the doctors contacted me in 2003, and they're like, we have a donor, but she doesn't want to let you know who she is. She wants to explain it to you herself. And when I end up meeting her, I was like, why? Why would you risk your life? Or, she was like, Flex, I lost my dad when I was young. And she actually used to babysit our children while we were in and Bible study. And when she heard about, me having my problems, she was like, if I could just give him, his kids an opportunity to be with their dad 3 or 4 more years, she would do that. So again, having that kidney transplant and was in 2003. And I remember her, walking out of the hospital. She came in and she was like, listen, I just want to let you know, I just found out that I have cancer, but you're okay. And I'm like, wait a minute, you worried about me and you have cancer? She's like, yeah, you're going to be okay. I end up having 9 surgeries in 11 weeks that I almost passed away from. I thought I could come back to the sport after my transplant. And after each surgery, it turned into me not wanting to compete anymore, just me fighting for my life. I'm like, man, I just want to be here. What's ironic is I've had a lot of surgeries since then, back surgeries, just all kind of surgeries. Even in the last 2 years, I've had over like 50 surgeries. Unfortunately, in 2020, I ended up losing my leg below the knee due to a blood clot. And nobody in my family tree ever had any issues like I've had or anything like that. So when we talk about generational, health, I come from an era where my grandparents passed away and it was just natural. They didn't know. My grandmother, I remember I only remember her being in the hospital and her saying, I want to pass away at home. But we didn't know what they passed away from. So when we plant those seeds, we got to be honest with our kids about what we're going through. And from all the things that I was going through, as one thing, I had tremendous weaknesses, but telling on myself was never one. Being honest about whatever I was going through, being suicidal, the things that I did, that was never a weakness. So I remember always just allowing my kids see me struggle, because I was always aware that as they get older, their parents are going to hear of me or known about me, and they're going to tell them all these great things about me. But I want them to know the real me, that, hey, I struggled in life. And unfortunately, life is going to be a struggle. And, and I wanted to just break that curse. My dad, I remember talking to him like, Dad, why were you this way? And he's like, listen, son, and my dad never told me he loved me. It was just back then, they didn't do that. It was considered weakness. My dad, I was just so infatuated with him. He's a tall, handsome man. He was just the coolest thing on the planet. I just always wanted to just sit in his lap and just sit and talk to him. He was like, no, you don't do that. No, you don't do that. So I remember I just wanted to break that with my kids. I was affectionate with my kids. I kissed them, I hugged them, I text them, I love them. You beautiful, all that stuff. We have to instill that in our new generation and break that generational curse amongst men. And I don't even think it's a black thing. I think it's just a man thing. A lot of us, we're just dealt that way and go through those things. It's great that this month is considered Men's Mental Health Awareness Month, even though I think a couple other have kind of trying to, jack our month. But I'm so happy that, I won't even get into it. I mean, that's biblical, but I'll leave that alone. But, Ms. Mosley, I'm just so happy of you just being disciplined and honoring God and those thoughts and giving us a platform to be able to speak. It just meant, if I can just say anything to you guys at all, just, man, if you have a wife, just be honest with her. A lot of times, like, I'm very closed off, even still. I hate being in public. I can't stand it. I can't stand talking. Every photo shoot I ever done that's in a magazine now, I can remember I tried to get out of it. I'd lie. Oh, I'm sick. I can't make it. Because again, it's just that self-doubt creeping back in my head. If my wife, Sheena, who's an amazing woman. You know, I internalize things. Again, I just think like, no, I'm a man. I'm supposed to handle this. I don't want to put it on her. I don't want to put my weakness on her and cause her distress. But, you know, she would sit there thinking that she done something wrong, you know, or she'd be having her thoughts. And she's been with me through a lot of these surgeries. And, you know, she's a caregiver. She's always been a caregiver. And it's really interesting how God works. You know, I'm a very visual person. I come from a visual sport. So unfortunately, you know, the women I'm attracted to, they have to have this certain look. And when I first, you know, met her, I remember, you know, we met on Instagram. You know, she had made a comment in one of my posts, and I remember immediately, I'd always do my research before I respond to anybody. I'm going looking at their posts, scrolling, looking what they're saying, and I couldn't find a picture of her you know, from the waist up. And I'm like, oh gosh, you know, she one of those cute girls with a nice face, but you know, just all out of whack, you know, body and everything else. And I remember, you know, sending her a message. And it took her a while to respond. Later on, I mean, she didn't even know how to use the internet. I didn't know that, but we made an arrangement to be able to meet. And I remember, you know, when I first seen her, I was like, oh my God, jeez. You know, I was, again, in me like, oh my gosh, she gonna see me, she's gonna meet me, and, you know, she's not gonna like me, this, that, and the other. But, you know, the interesting thing is I visually was attracted to her, but God knew my heart. And he knew the things that I was going to go through in the future. So here we are now. You know, she's been to the hospital, so many surgeries, so many times when they said I wasn't going to make it. And she's like always just reassured me, listen, I don't care if I have to clean your diapers, and I'm not going nowhere. So we got to be honest with our women. We have to be honest with our next generation about what we're going through, about mental health, building strong men, and those things. Those are the things that we have to be honest and planting those seeds. Unlike our parents and our grandparents with us, we have to be honest with those things and help them to understand it. Then also just building strong men, letting them know, hey, listen, it takes a stronger man to show their emotions and to be out there. It's the weaker man who wants to hurt you and stuff like that. So again, if I can tell you men anything at all, man, just be honest. You know, it's a time now in this world where strong men are going to have to stand up. We're just in some biblical times that are things that are going now. So stand up, be proud, you know, and, you know, together I do feel that, you know, that old saying, you know, that we can change this planet. I do feel that we can, but we're going to have to come together as strong men and be honest about what we're going through and share what we're going through and build stronger and healthier men moving forward. So thank you again for everybody who's coming here. Again, from Ms. Mosley, giving us this opportunity. Dr. Jacobs, everyone, thank you very much. I appreciate it.